And we're live. Hey, all you crazy sci-fi and fantasy fans, it's time for your daily dose of shenanigans over here at the Blasters and Blades podcast. Just three nerdy veterans geeking out over our science fiction passions and fantastical fantasies. A place where magic is king, the sky is the limit, and space is the place. So without further ado, I will point out that this is another episode recorded during the week-long festivities known as Dragon Con. So I'll be riding solo, but I have an outstanding guest for you today. You might not have heard of him, but he's kind of awesome. We've got Jamie Ibson. Did I pronounce that right?
Yes. Hello.
Hello. So can you tell the listeners and viewers a little bit about yourself in case they don't know who you are?
If they don't know who I am, let's see. I'm 40. I'm Canadian. I started writing when I went to LibertyCon for the first time, which was LibertyCon 30. I'm pretty well hooked in with Chris Kennedy Publishing for a lot of what I've been writing. A couple of publications with Bain and anthologies. Married to the lovely Michelle. We have cats. And I'm coming to you from the Maritimes, which is east of Maine, which confuses some people. But yeah, it goes east even further. And I'm about 10 minutes from the Maine border. So yeah, here I am.
All right. And I will have you know that I have it on great authority that 40 is the new 20. That's what I tell myself anyway. That's the mantra in the mirror. Like, no, your hair's not falling out. I'm just getting a haircut.
Okay. As soon as they start issuing new knees, I'll believe you.
The VA up there doesn't do that for you? I mean, I'm telling you, I could get prosthetics. Pretty soon I'm going to be like RoboCop.
This is kind of why I wanted to write Herbicide, was the whole, like, when the parts are failing, just swap them out for the new, like, kick-ass cyborg version.
Nice. Although I had a friend of mine, it started a series we co-wrote, and then when our writing styles differed, he kept the one series, but it was the cyborg core, and the whole premise was as a joke. Somebody went to the VA, and instead of keeping them, they turned him into a cyborg and put him back to work.
Well, that's
Chris Winder wrote that. I thought that was hilarious.
That's pretty close to how it works in the contractor war setting.
Do you have like a veterans administration for like the hospitals for veterans to get hurt or something up there?
Well, no. So as I understand it, when you've got vets in the U.S., then the VA like has you go to VA hospitals and you see VA doctors and all that kind of thing. Veterans Affairs in Canada, well, like Canadians, our healthcare is paid for by our provincial government, right?
Okay.
Whether that's a good thing or not, is subject to rigorous debate. But what happens with VA is they will often take an injury that you've suffered or an illness that you've accumulated through service, and it turns into like a pensionable cash payment, and then they'll connect you to doctors and stuff like that might not be covered by your provincial healthcare plan. Psychological stuff. Say you've come back with an operational stress injury or PTSD. Seeing a psychologist for counseling would not be covered under our plan, but it would be through VA or VAC. But other stuff that comes up, sometimes it's just like, well, here's a little more money so you don't have to work as hard, and that's not such a bad thing.
So we have the running joke here that the Veterans Administration is where the U.S. government gives you a second chance to die for your country.
I have seen that t-shirt, yes.
Yeah, sometimes. My favorite t-shirt was a buddy of mine had that said, disabled American veteran, some assembly required, because he lost his leg.
Yeah. I saw one that says, the enemy has made a terrible mistake because now my leg is bulletproof.
I like that one.
So,
all right. So the next part of the introduction, dear listener, is how we found them. And so I actually met Jamie through Cisca. She's introduced me to some pretty cool people, and I'm sure you met Cisca at a bar somewhere because that's how she meets everybody.
Well, it would have been a LibertyCon bar, but yes. I want to say it was actually probably not even a bar. It might have been a room party. My introduction to the CKP gang in general was the release party for the third book in the Four Horsemen series, which was the anthology called A Fistful of Credits. And so LibertyCon 30, the first two books were out, Cartwright's Cavaliers, Asbrand Solutions, and then the big party was for A Fistful of Credits. And, you could hear them laughing and hollering from 2 floors away, and it was a good time. And me being awkward and not knowing anybody at that moment, walked in and fled like 10 minutes later because I was awkward and socially terrified and all that kind of thing. But it's worked out really well. So, it was all good. The only person I recognized when I walked in was Jason Cordova, and we've written a book together since. But at the time, I just recognized him because he was the dude who had the green hair.
Oh, okay. Fair enough. So now, because this is the Blasters and Blade podcast, you have to answer the religion question, and this determines whether you get to stay. So, Aliens, District 9, or Starship Troopers?
What was the first one? Aliens?
Aliens.
Aliens, 100%.
I thought about putting the Predator because Predator versus Aliens confuses people, but they were two separate ones as well. But I didn't want to confuse you, so I was trying to keep it simple.
No, I mean, like, you want to see a movie chock full of quotes, it's Aliens, right? Like, everybody who knows it, they can practically recite the entire movie.
It's up there with Monty Python and quotable movies.
Yeah, 100%.
So, I ain't got time to bleed.
Yeah.
All right, and because we're polytheistic here at the Blasters and Blades, King Arthur, The 13th Warrior, or Warcraft?
13th Warrior.
Good movie, by the way. It's because of that movie that I tried mead for the first time.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I just wanted to see what it was about. Because you remember he could drink the mead because it was honey based, not wheat based.
The scene that I remember best from 13th Warrior is the duel, and they've got their shields lined up, and there's like the huge tank dude beating on the Viking, and his shield keeps breaking, and he's just getting clobbered, and then at the end of it, he just like steps aside, ganks the guy in the kidneys, he drops dead, and fights over. And it looked like he was losing when he was just messing with them the entire
I can appreciate that.
And he's like, what the hell was that here? Like, oh my God. And he's like, now he has to worry about everything he can't see. And that was like a big, whoa, insightful kind of moment. So I remember that scene really, really well. That was totally cool.
And I know Warcraft is considered controversial because some people that played the game hated the movie, but having never played the game, I enjoyed the movie and was kind of disappointed they never made a second one.
I played the original first two when they were still real-time strategy games. I have never played Warcraft 3, and I've spent all of 5 minutes playing World of Warcraft and decided it was not my jam. So
I know a little bit. So when I was in grad school, one of my classmates was like, oh, this girl you work with, you got to hook me up with her. And I'm like, all right. She was interested too. So I set them up on a date. They did their thing, and they both wanted it. He walked out in the middle of the date where it was like a sure thing for him, romantically. I'm not going to presume otherwise. He walked out. Oh, my clan is raiding today. Bye. I'm like, what? No.
Oh my.
She found someone else, and he's still single.
Oh my. Yeah.
So now it's awkward. You realize you're not as bad as that.
What I remember best about the original Warcraft games, the RTSs, was you could keep clicking on the units, and they would say different things. But if you clicked on them 4 or 5 times, the things they would say would change. And like you start clicking on an orc sailing ship, like an ironclad ship out in the water. Eventually, like you clicking and making the boat rock makes the orc seasick. That kind of comedy. And there was sheep that would just like wander around grazing in the maps. And if you keep clicking on them, eventually they would explode. It was so random. But there was a ton of character to the setting right out the gate, whether before it ever went to the action RPG that it, monstrosity that it became. And it was one of the first times that they really did a good job of having a story-based campaign. I think, before that, it tended to pretty much just be like, well, here's a map, here's a bad guy, go, smash each other's buildings and stuff. And the only other time that it had really been done was the Dune RTS, the Frank Herbert's Dune, and that one goes all the way back to like the mid-90s. So I'm dating myself, but never played World of Warcraft, not really my thing. And the intensity of the players, and oh, my clan is raiding, gotta go. That level of insane dedication is very not me. I like to be able to put my games down and come back to it whenever I want.
Yeah, and if you do the real-time stuff, that means you always have to worry about like keeping shielded or whatever, because whereas when I play Skyrim, when I turn it off, the world ceases to be.
Yeah, the game is on pause, right? I mean, the most I can commit to a game at one time is 15 minutes in a World of Tanks scrap, and that's about it. So
yeah. So, because we here at the Blasters and Blades podcast like both the fantastical and the scientific, what was your first love, sci-fi or fantasy?
Oh boy, um, it all kind of mushed together. Um, my dad had an amazing science fiction and fantasy bookshelf when I was growing up. And he had the Forever War and a bunch of other Joe Haldeman books. He had 3/4 of Heinlein stuff. I read Starship Troopers 4 or 5 times. But I also remember in grade 7, my grade 7 teacher. I was tested as being advanced in reading pretty early on. I think it would have been about grade 5 or grade 6. And so in grade 7, my teacher comes over and he thumps this enormous tome down on my desk. And he's like, let me know what you think. Well, it was the omnibus version of Deed of Paxenarian. And, 1,000 pages, a little intimidating for a grade 7 kid. But Deed of Paxenarian to this day remains my favorite novel of all time. And Pax is probably my favorite character of all time. The arc for her from lowly sheep farmer's daughter to blessed paladin of the gods, who not going to spoil the ending, but who manages to figure out this ancient mystery and right an ancient wrong. Absolutely tremendous, and the sacrifice that she makes at the very end was absolutely heartrending. So, Elizabeth Moon is she wrote it, and brilliant, absolutely brilliant. I've never read anything that comes close. So yeah, complicated answer. I don't know which I read first though.
What was your first memory of engaging in the genre of speculative fiction at large? Was it that? I mean, do you have a specific, or does it all blur together?
Well, again, my dad's bookshelf. I've forgotten one. Dorsai. Dorsai is the other one. So like he had Dorsai, he had Starship Troopers, he had Forever War. There was Callahan's Cross Time Saloon mixed in there, a whole bunch of Spider Robinson stuff. And so like my early teenagehood and even earlier, really, Dad played D&D in the 70s and into the early 80s, and I came along in 81. And then when I was 10 or 11, I started asking about these Dungeons and Dragons books, not knowing what they were. And he said, well, imagine that you're playing Snakes and Ladders, but I have to describe the maze to you, and that there's monsters in there that are hunting you too. And he just riffed an entire introductory adventure kind of a thing as we're heading to these caverns just off the top of his head. And my dad's a really articulate guy. He writes professionally for a living as a copyright editor, but he's very articulate. And so he was able to just paint the story in my mind. And I just couldn't stop grinning. And so I dug into the books, and I think by the time I was 11 or 12, Dad tried to run a campaign for me and my brother and my 2 stepbrothers. And I was the oldest of the bunch, so we didn't really stick with it for very long because I think Craig was only 3 or 4 at the time. But yeah, it was. I mean, that was it. Here I am 30 years later, and I'm still hooked on the stuff. So it's all good.
Nice. So, what is it about speculative fiction that you love?
Well, I think I love the different stories for different reasons. Fantasy is amazing because of the power of magic and the power of bending the universe, if that makes sense. The different fantasy settings that are out there, they each are, in a sense, defined by how the world is bent, how the world is different, whether it's a low magic setting, whether it's magic does everything for you, spell punk stuff where they use spell effects to create modern technology but through magic instead, that kind of a thing. And that's got a huge appeal. And in fantasy, the nerds, the bookish types tend to end up being 20th level wizards, and that's got its own appeal as well. With sci-fi, you can start to ask the what if questions. Start with your own existence, and then start asking questions as to how the future might go, or how the future might be changed if this particular thing came along. And that's a little bit of the inspiration for Myrmidons Inc. I know we're not really there yet, but the idea that in Myrmidons that the technology exists that people whose bodies are failing them can get an upgrade and replace organs that are failing, or in the Myrmidons case, when they have an illness like muscular dystrophy, that they can go to a doc and be like, all right, I want you to cut everything off and I want an all new everything, basically leave the brain and the spinal cord and replace everything else. And that's a little bit of the philosophy behind it, is like, what kind of a person goes to the doctor and has everything cut off? Maybe if you go to the doctor to asking for that, you ought to be talking to a psychiatrist. But the other question is, well, what if you're staring death in the eye and this is a choice you have, one that doesn't exist today? So it's they're both cool, and they're both cool for completely different reasons, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
So at what point in time, as you start replacing parts, do you stop being you?
That's a really good question. And my take on it is, so long as, the thinking part of you remains there, then you're still you. Shadowrun, for example, as characters in the Shadowrun game system get cyborg upgrades, their soul is slowly chipped away, and they lose that ability to manipulate magic. And in a game sense, it literally caps their effectiveness if they were to use magical powers and stuff like that. I didn't really dig into that with the Myrmidon setting. With cyberpunk in general, like transhumanism is one of the themes. And so rather than delving too much into how human is a cyborg when all that's left is the brain, I set up a kind of a foil between the Myrmidons and the gal who's basically the main character of the story, Selena. Selena is a genetically edited Catgirl Sicario assassin, and she's product from Paragon Savage Genetics. And so this is the balance between those two, is like the perfect synthetic human weapon versus the perfect biological human-ish weapon, and the two of them kind of square off against each other, but it doesn't go quite that way. So, yeah. So I don't know if I answered your question, but
you did. Have you seen the Clone Wars that Star Wars did with the Disney Plus?
No, I haven't watched any of the animated Star Wars stuff. I know I can get at it, but I generally don't really watch TV like at all.
I don't watch a lot anymore either. But no, one of the things they did on that show, but like mostly what I watch is by exposing my kids to that kind of stuff and watching stuff with them, kind of thing. But one of the things they did in the Clone Wars is they started talking about the nature of free will, because they were literally bred to be fighters. Because they were cloned and they were flash grown, their lives were shorter. And then they started having decay, and they were sort of forced to follow orders. And one of the things it started doing was like asking those existential questions of what it means to be alive, what it means to be free. And I think that's the beauty of sci-fi. You can ask those questions, because though they're questions we might very well face someday as technology improves, right? Like, sure. I mean, we already have some people that are more plastic than real anymore, it seems, with all the cosmetic surgery. So you're already starting to get to those kind of questions. And that's what I like. Is the ability to wax philosophical about various topics that you can do in a sci-fi setting and make it fun, unlike the philosophy classes you sat through in college, where it's like, are you really there? And what is there really? Like, I had some of those weird questions where like the right answer was, is the chair even there? And it's that was a little too hokey for me. But when you see it introduced in a tangible way in sci-fi, like, it's real. It makes sense. Like, you can wrap your head around that.
It's a bit of a study in future ethics. Let's worry about these problems before they come up. And like with Ocelot, the Paragon Savage Genetics is this mega corporation, and they're not exactly bad guys, but there aren't really any good guys when it comes to mega corporations in the setting anyway. And the thing that's
in real life too.
Pardon me?
I'd say in real life too.
Okay, that's fair. So the thing with PSG is they've created these animal hybrid bioweapons that they then rent or sell to whomever, and the government of La República del Escobar is their biggest client, and so that's where they've got their headquarters set up, and that's where all of the new cutting edge technology is developed, and the way that PSG coerces the genies into cooperating. It's actually something that my buddy Quincy Allen came up with. He and I were, I had written a short story that became basically the climax of Herbicide for the We Dare anthology that I edited a couple years ago. Quincy was invited to the anthology, and he was like, well, I want to do this kind of Island of Dr. Moreau kind of a thing. And I said, well, let me tell you about PSG, because their characters, it's a scene in my story, but there's an awful lot about them that I haven't really delved into. And so he came up with this idea of what he calls the methionine protocol. And methionine is a amino acid that we all have in our bodies. And the story in the setting is that the genies have been selectively edited so that their bodies don't produce methionine. If they don't get it in the form of regular injections every 3-4 days, then their cells begin to break down at the molecular level, and they more or less will die and disintegrate due to organ failure and stuff like this. And so that's the leash that PSG has on their genies. And Quincy's story from We Dare was about how the chief geneticist feels terrible about what's happening to what she sees as her children. She's accepting PSG's money to do the research because she's a driven scientist that way, but she doesn't want to see them enslaved. And that's basically the situation they find themselves in, the genies do. So she finds a way to reverse the methionine protocol and make her getaway. Quincy's going to be expanding that short story into a novel probably in 2022. But that's really like the core of it, right? Is that the genies, they're born with free will, but there's consequences if they start screwing around. And that's like Dr. Fujimoto's big thing, is finding a way to set them free. Because if the methionine protocol remains in place, then the genies they can be literally killed at any time just by stopping their access to the injections. So yeah, like the people who made that decision at PSG, they're scumbags. But there's good people working for PSG as well who are just trying to make the best of a bad situation.
Okay, so we dove in a little bit when we were talking philosophical to some of the universe, which we normally get to a little bit later. But let's get back on track. But introduce you to the audience a little bit. So, how did your love of speculative fiction, because clearly you're a reader, how did that translate and transition into you writing stories yourself?
Going to LibertyCon really changed everything. Blanket statement. I had never been to a literary con before. LibertyCon is an amazing one to go to because it has such a high concentration of professionals, between the science types and the author types and the publishing types, and like that's a really mushy overlapping Venn diagram. I'll never forget. I'd been talking to Gary Poole at he works with John Ringo on a lot of stuff. I'd been talking to him about this idea for a novel that I'd had. I show up, and the first panel I go to is how to approach publishers, and Gary is speaking at the panel, and he's never met me. And as I'm sitting there in the audience listening to this panel, my heart is just sinking, because by the end of it, I'm like, oh God, I've been doing this all wrong. And then I caught Gary on his way out the door, and we went outside and we chatted. I introduced myself, and he's like, no, like we're good. Okay. It's, you haven't, cheated. You haven't pissed anybody off, just by talking to me about your interest in writing zombie stuff. So it's all good. Right. And that was kind of my introduction to this is feasible. But then the question was, well, do I have anything finished that I could do anything with? No, not really. But meeting people at LibertyCon opened a lot of doors, because now I had emails that I could send stuff to and, write queer letters. And that's how I hooked in with Chris Kennedy was he had this short story anthology, and I wrote if they had any opportunities for a brand new writer who didn't know what he was doing. And Chris was like, well, send me something and we'll see. I work with a lot of new authors, and I'm happy to help and coach and teach. Chris has his doctorate in education, and so that's a passion of his. And so he's taught me a ton. And then there's other people that work with CKP that also teach fiction and stuff like that. So everything changed when I went to LibertyCon 30, and I owe Brandy and Fritz and everybody on staff at LibertyCon a huge debt of gratitude for putting on such an awesome convention, because it's not an exaggeration to say that attending LibertyCon 30 changed my life. So that's how I got started.
That's cool. So sorry about that. He's excited. So many authors let their own real life experience influence the stories they tell. So is there any one specific formidable moment for you that shapes you as a storyteller?
I wouldn't say so. My first novel that I wrote was in the Four Horsemen universe, and I did that with Jason Cordova. And Gunboat Diplomacy, it's written from two opposing points of view. Neither one of them is really the hero. They're just the antagonist to the other half of the story. And the story focuses on a pair of aliens. One looks like tigers, and that was mostly what Jason wrote. And then the other one, and they're basically space pirates. And then there's Brent, who is an Ugar, and the Ugar are these enormous purple don't care bears, who are known for rending things limb from limb. Well, Brent is only like the seventh Ugar who's ever made it to the end of space cop training. In Four Horsemen, they're called the Peacemakers. And the last thing that a peacemaker does before receiving his badge is he's tasked with a mission. And he has to go out, and he's given his mission parameters and needs to work the problem and come to a solution. And so that was fun, because I spent 14 years as an RCMP officer, and I got to write the rookie space cop story, except my rookie space cop was a 9-foot tall bear. And he was awesome. So that was a lot of fun, being able to, go back to rookie days of policing. Not that I dealt with a lot of space pirates, but there's certain things that translate over really well, and that was a lot of fun.
Okay. Well, actually, you were so Kennedy has a policy when it comes to expanding lore. He who's was it the furthest with the mostest wins?
More or less.
Yeah, and so I actually had in that same anthology a story about a peacemaker, and I wasn't a cop, but I was writing that. He's like, you turned yours in like 45 minutes after he did, so you got to redo all of this stuff to fit his canon. Yeah. So I didn't know who you were, but I was cursing you.
Well, I came along afterwards. Kevin Eikenberry was the one who turned in the first Peacemaker story, and he's been
okay. It wasn't you. Then I didn't.
Peacemaker. Yeah, there's a parallel Peacemaker line to the stories that's about to conclude. Actually, Harbinger is the last book in that series, and it's coming out. I got a sneak peek at it. It's awesome, and it's been building for a long time. But yeah, Ike is one of those guys who's taught me a ton. He's given classes on story structure and building sympathetic heroes and dastardly villains and all that kind of thing. And I've really taken a lot of his stuff to heart, because he's a tremendous teacher, and he's able to really drill down on things. I've written to him a couple times. I'm like, so I'm kind of struggling with this thing, and we talked about this, and I'm not sure how to work that in. And he's like that. And he'll like 2 sentences, and it's like the light went on, and I can see exactly where he's coming from. And then I just have to dial up a certain aspect of the story by 10%, and booyah, it's all good. So yeah, I didn't come along until much later. There was the original trilogy of anthologies, A Fistful of Credits, For a Few Credits More, and The Good, the Bad, and the Merc. And then my first short with Four Horsemen was in Luck Is Not a Factor, and that came out a while later. I want to say that was early 2019. I'd have to check.
Okay, so I had the second anthology, which is For a Few Credits More, and then I had my last one was Luck Is Not a Factor. Was the 2 I was in.
Yep. With the green cover.
Yeah, I submitted for one more, but he's the only one who's ever rejected a story. So it was sort of fortuitous for me, because I realized what I did wrong. I violated the canon, but if you don't the Bible that he gave me was the original one, and so they obviously expanded
Well,
on it.
yeah, it's grown so fast.
And I didn't think to ask for the updated version, so everything I had written was good with the first Bible, but not the expanded one.
Sure.
And by then, because it was like so close, I'm like, don't worry about it. I'll use it for something else. And I ended up turning it into a novella that'll get published somewhere else. But
Nice.
but yeah, it's they say you're not. I've heard some people joke that you're not a real author until you've been rejected once at least. So Chris Kennedy was that for me. So I got it in the box. Now I can move on.
I'm sure he's happy to help out.
Yeah, I've told him that. He thinks it's hilarious.
Very good.
But he's a good guy for a sailor. Speaking of military and sailors, yeah, well, no one's perfect. But you mentioned earlier in your bio mentions that you were in the Canadian military. You were specifically in the reserves, and then when you got out, you went into law enforcement as a Mountie. So, how do you feel like your time in uniform affects the stories you tell?
Well, it's interesting a bit because so many of the readers, that read military sci-fi in particular, are American veterans. That I've both had positive and negative feedback when I've tried to bring in Canadianness to that. A Canadian E5 is a master corporal. That confuses the heck out of Americans. They've never heard of such a creature. And the other thing that I like to talk to them about is how many sergeants there are in the U.S. military. It's, I joke that you guys ran out of nouns and just started slapping other random adjectives in front of sergeant until you hit E9. Whereas in the Canadian forces, pardon me?
That's accurate.
In the Canadian forces, and then in the U.S. warrant officers, right? They're their own unique technical expert specialists that aren't quite NCOs. They're not quite officers. They are commissioned, but they're not like lieutenants and captains and stuff. It's a really weird intermediary thing. In the Canadian forces, a warrant officer is a sergeant who got promoted. That's all there is to it. Your platoon's senior NCO is going to be a warrant officer, and then you've got like your company sergeant major would be a master warrant, and so on. So when I start throwing it around Canadian ranks, people immediately perk up and they're like, "Well, this is weird. This is different." That kind of thing. And then when I did that story for We Shall Rise in the third Black Tide Rising anthology, the story was about a bunch of Canadians who rode out most of the plague in our NORAD bunker in kind of north center Ontario. It's a fascinating facility. It's a long ways down. I think it's 600 feet underground is this bunker, and that's where we tracked Santa Claus from. But that was where, according to what I wrote, the Canadian surviving government fled to with whatever uniforms they could marshal to protect them. And then after Canadian winter has done its business, then they start working their way towards the coasts. And so our story picks up with some of those survivors working their way through the prairies. And I got a really cool review in Black Tide Risings, in We Shall Rise, where one of the guys reviewing the book was like, I'm a Canadian veteran. I really appreciated the Canadian story. It was super cool to see us finally pop up somewhere in fiction, because generally speaking, we don't. So I try to get a little bit of Canadianness in there somewhere. In Myrmidons, with us having spread out to the stars, the planet of Rideau is basically the Canadian planet, and there's hockey jokes and stuff like that. But
maple syrup.
Well, see, I don't want to get too close to the maple syrup because of that whole Troy Rising series that John Ringo did, where maple syrup was the key to unlocking the galaxy in the first place. When Tyler Vernon starts selling maple syrup to the Glatoon and he becomes a billionaire overnight, I giggled a lot at that. And then the only other stuff really, as far as being in the Army and being law enforcement, is like the combat and the fighting stuff. I've never been in combat. I didn't go to Afghanistan. I didn't go to Iraq. Peacekeeping in Bosnia was pretty chill, except for the last 3 weeks after 9/11. But I've been in plenty of fist fights, and I've been punched out a bunch of times, and I've
And
punched
that's
other
just when
people out
you're
a bunch
playing
of times.
hockey, right?
Well, not just on the ice. I was a Mountie in Surrey, which is a city of like 600,000 people, I think, and it has a bit of a rep for being kind of rough in certain areas of town. And that's where I was posted straight out of the RCMP Academy, which is called Depot. So as a brand new Depot recruit, I went to the roughest part of the roughest city that the Mounties police in, and gotten more than my fair share of scraps. So I know what it's like to have to fight through getting punched in the nose and that sort of thing. And I know that there are some authors who are martial artists specifically so that they can better articulate, their hand-to-hand combat scenes. Um, the thing with martial arts I find is that there's rules, and on the street there really aren't many. So yeah, a couple different
Well,
things.
the Canadians, though, you have a leg up when it comes to intergalactic warfare, because it's a little known secret that we learned if you watch Stargate, is that all alien planets look like Canada. So you guys have got that like going for you.
Well, and you know what? It's a big country. We got a lot of different places that look like a lot of different things. So, I was in BC for almost 16 years, and now I'm in the Maritimes, and completely different part of the country, completely different accents, completely different people. It's been a lot of fun. It's been an adventure, but this being my third home in Canada, it just strikes me how different places can be from place to place. So
Yeah. So, well, I mean, but you got that going for you. Like I said, I think there are very few places on Earth where you can get so many terrain features in one place. That's one of the reasons they film in New Zealand so much.
yeah,
Because,
yeah.
and so, but you're a lot closer to Hollywood, so it's a lot cheaper trip for them. So,
I guess that's true. Yeah, I would
so
love to see filming up here. Actually, in New Brunswick, it's beautiful. It's rolling hills, and like when Americans think of stereotypical Canada, it's right here.
yeah,
Um, it's the rolling hills and the maple. Everybody becomes like a maple sugar farmer for about 3 weeks at the end of winter. Everybody's got camp, silver birch trees, moose, bears, Canada geese, intimidating people everywhere you go. New Brunswick is the only truly bilingual province we have. Quebec is French only, and almost everywhere else is English only. And then New Brunswick truly is bilingual. It's almost 50-50, French speaking and English speaking. The maritime accent is alive and well here, and that's the stereotypical Canadian accent. So it's a lot of fun. I think if Americans come up this way to explore, they come away with that like stereotype really reinforced that this is Canada. Here we are.
well, I mean, we as Americans learned everything we need to know from South Park. Blame Canada.
Well, that and Bob and Doug and Take Off, you hoser. So
Yeah. So, getting us back on track, when you write, military or just in general, do you ever draw on people you knew from your time, both as a Mountie and as a Canadian soldier?
absolutely.
Names changed to protect the guilty or the innocent?
Sometimes not. There's say no more.
So we've talked a little bit about how your time in uniform affects the stories as you tell them. Does it affect how you engage with stories now as both a reader or a watcher, if you're watching TV or whatever, how you engage with content? So, for instance, if I watch a movie and they have a gun that they never seem to ever reload, I'm going to notice where most people just don't.
Okay. Yeah. I suppose that's true. And guys with belt feds, just like ripping off 20 or 30 rounds at a time.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. Shooting recoilless rifles and bazookas indoors. That makes me laugh. Pursuits. One of my favorite pursuits, and it's not really a pursuit, but it's kind of a pursuit in a movie, was in Way of the Gun. 20 years old, Ryan Philippe and Benicio del Toro as these scumbags, and they've kidnapped this woman because they're the bad guys, even though they're kind of the protagonists. And the bodyguards are chasing them, and they're in their little car, and they're slow, like they've got it in drive, but they're not even touching the gas. and the bodyguards are running from cover to cover and trying to catch up to them, and they're just like slowly retreating, little bit by little bit. And then eventually they just like shut the door and hit the gas. And the bodyguards realize they're now like 200 yards from their car and they've got to run back in order to be able to catch up. I thought that scene was brilliant, because nobody in their right mind wants to get into an actual pursuit. They are dangerous as hell. Odds are somebody's going to die, and there's so much potential for disaster. And so, up here, generally speaking, the police don't pursue anywhere near as frequently as they do in the States. But there was an incident in Way of the Gun where they were dangerously genre savvy, if you want to call it that, and they knew to get their bad guys, their opponents, their enemies away from their car so that they didn't get in a pursuit in the first place. And I thought that was genius.
I like it. The only thing I ever dealt with, I mean, other than obviously gunfights on the highways in Iraq, but as far as in general, like my experience with cop type stuff, even in media, something like watching a Cops episode where it's some guy that looks like he hasn't left a donut shop in a couple years, and then he's huffing and puffing, and the perp is like basically speed walking away. Luckily, tasers are the great equalizers these days.
Well, they can be, but you got to be mighty close for those. A taser is not a distance weapon at all, and they kind of disallowed the shotgun version of the taser round, which I think is a shame, because if you ever watch the video on the 12 gauge taser rounds, they are a sight to behold. They launch the entire package down the barrel, and there's a pair of prongs that connect, and then there's like a trailing, like a porcupine ball thing, and the spines are what connects the circuit. And they had to discontinue them because with a standard taser, you ride the lightning for 5 seconds, and that's generally enough to take the fight out of you, and for the member deploying it to jump in and like chicken wing an arm, get you into an arm bar or a wrist lock or something like that, so they can move into cuffing. Well, the shotgun version is designed to be deployed from an awful lot further away, so it cycles for 20 seconds at a time. I cannot conceive of how much that would hurt to be, electrocuted the way that they do for 20 seconds at a time. That would be awful. But I mean, it might also be a little funny. Depends.
Have you so for instance, in the U.S. Army, one of the things they train us with, we have to go through the gas chamber, so you know what it's like. I've seen a lot of MPs in the U.S. Army that had to get shot with the taser as part of the collocation. Is that something you guys do as well?
It used to be. They stopped doing it a couple years before I got out of the force. The really crummy thing was getting pepper sprayed. That's week 8 at depot. And it's part of defensive tactics. It's like an escalation. They start with, well, what if you're arresting somebody and they're cooperative? Well, you tell them to, assume the arresting position, you guide them through it, then you go in and you cuff them and you're good. And then, there's an escalation, and then eventually you hit the point where you're deploying pepper spray. And so on that Friday, they have everybody in the troop lined up, about 30 of us, and they would spray you with an entire can. And then you would have your defensive tactic. It's like your cop class instructors who deploy the spray, and then your defensive tactics instructors are standing by, and they had a knee strike bag for kickboxing, and you've got to knee the bag 10 times while suffering the effects of the spray. Once you've hit it 10 times, they throw a radio on the ground as if yours has fallen off your belt. Now you got to go around on the ground and find it, and then call in an emergency backup request. And as soon as they do that, they give you a towel and you can start mopping it off. Doesn't matter. We get sprayed on Friday and it still sucks on Tuesday. It's miserable. I had an arrest of a drunk driver the one time, and before he was arrested, he was asking questions about whether tasers or pepper spray was worse. And I said, well, look, tasers suck. They suck a lot, but they only suck for 5 seconds at a time. And pepper spray sucks for days. And then later on, after he kicked out the window of my police car and was bashing his face off the silent patrolman and stuff, I'm telling him to stop, and he's like, "Why?" And I'm like, "Do you remember you asked about whether tasers or pepper spray were worse?" "Yeah." I don't have a taser. So this is how it's going to go. And he didn't care, and he smashed out the window, and yeah, he got a blast of the good stuff, and then he tried to kick out another PC, and it was drama. But that was one of the moments I'm never going to forget. Is why should I stop? Well, I don't have a taser, so
you should put that in a book somewhere.
Yeah,
that'd be funny. So transitioning away from the writing side in the Army side, let's talk about things from a fan angle. So you started writing right as the pandemic was making the world a little crazy. So you haven't had a chance to have all the experiences at cons and such. But have you ever spotted anyone out in the wilds reading one of your books?
No, not yet. Unless, do parents count? I don't know.
Yeah, totally. Did they buy it or did you gift it to them?
Well, if parents count, then yes, absolutely.
Did they buy it or did you gift it to them?
Maybe a little both.
Stage pictures still count. I'll go with it.
All right.
So, right, this is the part of the interview. We've waxed poetic about all kinds of topics. So we're running this episode a little long, but I'm cool with it. So this is the part of the introduction. Normally we'd be doing this at the 20-minute mark, not 40. But can you tell us everything you've written? Give us the Reader's Digest of your bibliography.
What I've written. Stuff that you're going to see my name on the cover for would be the 3 We Dare anthologies. We Dare is the first one. We Dare Semper Paratus is the Survivors of the Apocalypse. That one was awkwardly scheduled to come out in 2020, so that was unfortunate. And then We Dare No Man's Land came out earlier this year. That one was kind of putting the focus on, and it's a bit of a love letter to the badass women of science fiction like Ellen Ripley and Sarah Connor and Princess Leia and Cara Dune and those kinds of characters. So that one came out earlier this year. I wrote Gunboat Diplomacy with Jason Cordova in Four Horsemen. Unshackled will be out. I wrote in Four Horsemen with Casey Moores. That's going to be out in a little less than a month. I've got a novel called Pacific Shogun, which is post-apocalyptic Pacific Northwest in Christopher Woods' Fallen World series. And then Myrmidons just came out 2 days ago. It came out on the 3rd. On top of that, I've got stories in Freehold Resistance, Freehold Defiance, and We Shall Rise from Bane, and then a bunch of other short stories along the way as well, scattered throughout a bunch of anthologies here and there. So yeah, and then I just today, I sent in the manuscript for my next anthology, which is not We Dare. We called it And Then It Got Weird. It originally started as a bit of an in-joke, and it turned into a not exactly Halloween themed, but we're releasing it in time for Halloween, paranormal stories. I've got fantasy, steampunk, modern, noir, near future, distant future. There is a point in the stories where things take a bend for the paranormal, supernatural, and some of them are hysterically funny, and some of them are darker than black coffee. So it's a mix, it's a grab bag, but that'll be out October 22. Yeah, but basically, if you go to my website, I have all my titles listed there as well. If somebody's trying to collect them all, which I don't mind at all.
Understood. So we will link all of that in the show notes down below. And so while all of those sound fascinating, we sort of spilled the bag talking in the beginning, but today we want to talk about Myrmidons, and Elvis Likes It Too, Incorporated, Herbicided. So where did you get the premise for this universe? Was it psychedelics, Ouija board, overindulging in expired maple syrup?
Maple syrup.
No.
Okay, I talked about it a little bit at the beginning, where what if you could swap parts out? My wife had a friend, when I met her, I became friends with him as well. And Jesse suffered from Duchenne's muscular dystrophy. And it's a cruel disease because the body fails while leaving the brain completely intact. And Jesse passed in 2009 at the age of 29. He was the longest lived person at the time who'd ever suffered from Duchenne's muscular dystrophy. And at the time, it was kind of one of those like, well, I wish there was a way that we could swap out failing parts. And so that idea, right, where somebody is crippled, but they're staring death in the face, and they're like, "This is an option for me, and I'm going to take it." That came up with the idea for the Myrmidons themselves. And then it was late 2018 when I was just getting started with Chris Kennedy. I wrote to him and I said, "Do you have any plans for a non-Four Horsemen military sci-fi anthology?" And Chris said, "No, but you could do one." And I kind of like blue screen of panic for a little bit because I hadn't written hardly anything at the point. And that was on Friday. And by Monday, I was like, "You idiot, of course you have to say yes." So I did. And then my story in that was the very first story with the Myrmidons, and it started up the setting. And at the time, the plan was to focus entirely on the Myrmidons, and then along the way, Selena kind of grew on me, and then she became the focus of the novel. The other thing, and I mean, it's spoilers, but it's not really spoilers because the story's been published like 3 years ago. There was a shooting in Toronto. I want to say it was in 2018. And it was a spree shooting. It was a bad guy walking up and down the street with a pistol, just shooting random people. And it was terrible. But the really terrifying part for me was when I read the story that talked about the shooter's brother. The shooter's brother was in hospital in a coma because he had overdosed on fentanyl. When they did a search warrant on his house, they found 42 kilograms of carfentanil in the house. Carfentanil is lethal at the microgram dose. They cannot cut it small enough that it doesn't kill people. It's an elephant tranquilizer. It's purely synthetic. And 42 kilos of this stuff, properly deployed, would be enough to kill a city. And that was horrifying for me. So of course I had to turn it into a story, and that's why the book is called Herbicide. It's the death of a city. And so the Myrmidons, being synthetic cyborgs that they are, they're the only ones who are unaffected when they crop dust this city with this lethal drug poison, and then they end up getting blamed for it, and that's where the rest of the story is going to go with them, is them being on the run, being blamed for this horrific crime they didn't commit. But those are the two inspirations for the Myrmidons themselves. This idea that people with these wasting diseases could be not necessarily cured, but they could live anyway. And then this horrific incident in Toronto that led to an even more scary discovery. So, yeah.
Okay.
Kind of dark.
So before we dig in too much deeper, we normally like to go over the cover. So I'm going to pull that up. And
Sure.
while I do that, can you tell me how you came up with this piece of artwork that is also gracing the wall behind you?
Well, I'm a nerd and I paint miniatures. And so once you zoom back in on me, I'm going to show you the miniatures that I painted of those two characters. And basically I took pictures of them. So here's, let's see, you can just, I don't know if it'll focus on them. This is my geek cred, but that's Bellerophon. And then here's Selena. And I keep them on my desk. It's kind of like a keep an eye on the prize kind of a thing. And I've got a couple more of them here. They're characters in the story. I've kit bashed them out of green stuff and models from Reaper and that kind of thing, and painted them up. And they stare at me every day and they're like, this is your focus. This is what you're working on. So that idea where you've got this enormous towering cyborg with his energy shield defending the cat girl in front of him, that's kind of a metaphor for the whole story. And so I basically took a bunch of pictures of the miniatures, and I talked to Chris and I said, look, Jake Caleb does amazing work. Jake Caleb Design has done a bunch of covers for Chris Kennedy Publishing. And I told him I want him to do the cover because I've seen his cyberpunk looking stuff and it's exactly the right vibe for what I want. I don't mind delaying the publication of the book if it makes a difference between whether I get him or not. And Chris was able to get this brilliant piece of artwork done up pretty much exactly how I described it. And so I'm thrilled with the result. and I couldn't be happier.
Helps if I remember to unmute. I'm just trying to keep it muted while you're talking so you don't hear Elvis complaining about not going on a walk yet. But so for those who couldn't see it or who are listening on the audio version, how about we make this offer to them? They sign up for this is going to be released in middle of September. They sign up for your newsletter this month. When you release October's newsletter, you will host a close-up picture of those little figurines so they can check out whatever they missed. Does that sound fair?
Yeah, for sure. I've got free giveaway stories on my website that work through BookFunnel, and basically you can download some free fiction that I've already written, and that will get you signed up for the newsletter. They go out on the 5th and the 20th of every month. Although, well, I mean, it's the 5th today. I did one earlier this week because Herbicide came out on the 3rd. So yeah, my next one will be out on the 20th. And
this will air, so they'll have either the 20th or the 5th before they watch it. Just put it in October, and that gives them a reason to sign up. Yes. And I like encouraging people to join authors they like to join their newsletter, because you never know when the powers that be will change their mind. Especially those of you like me who enjoy military science fiction. It's a constant battle. Can I put my book up? No, it's got a cover. The cover has a picture of a gun on it. We can't have that. And so if you really want to stay up to date on authors you like, especially if you write like military topics, sometimes it's just best to join their newsletter and get direct from the source. So I try to encourage that. But let's move on to the book itself. So what would your 30-second elevator pitch be?
Oh, I should have rehearsed this. 27th century, and war is business continued by other means. Paragon Savage is the cutting edge lead for genetically enhanced animal-human hybrids, and Selena is their latest prototype. She's awesome. She's badass. And when things on the planet get too hot, as the corrupt government starts using Paragon Savage's genies to wage war on their enemies, the Myrmidons are brought in to extract some VIPs and maybe hit Paragon Savage for some pay data. And, it's just business, and business is good, I think is the tagline that we put together for it. So, yeah.
And so I'll give you a little sneak behind the curtain, dear listener, is normally the guests will get this about a week in advance. So they have time to think about the questions and come up with their answers. And I will say that because
I'm making it up as we go along.
Jamie's making it up as he goes along. He did not get the questions in advance because Sunday or Saturday night, he said, hey, I don't have any work this weekend and it's the holiday weekend. So if you want to knock this interview out, we could do it now. Yeah. And I thought, well, I don't want to have any issues where I'm scrambling at the last minute like I did. We've talked about before on the podcast. I'm like, okay, I could stack an episode. Sure, I'll have this prepared tomorrow. That was like literally 12 hours ago we agreed to do this. So he's doing all of this cold. Other than having listened to a few episodes, he's just making it up as he goes. So this is just him on it off the cuff. So I would say your elevator speech is pretty good. That normally freezes them even if they've prepped their answer.
Well, that was my intro at LibertyCon, right? Was I'd written this book and I wanted to talk to somebody about it, and I had never even heard of an elevator pitch at the time. I was that new, and so yeah. So what's your elevator pitch? My what? And they were like, well, like pitch it to me in 30 seconds, and I started with, well, it's done, and it went downhill from there. But yeah, it's a wicked fun story, and I've got more planned in the series, and I'm hoping to open it up to other people who are interested in like their cyberpunk with a dose of Star Wars.
Okay, so wow, wicked fun. I haven't heard that since I deployed with a guy from Maine. Although for him everything was wicked awesome. So I guess Maine is like America's Canada.
Sure, it's right there.
It's right there. So what is it that makes your series special?
It's a bit of a return to the cyberpunk stuff. We haven't had a lot of that, and obviously Cyberpunk 2077 came out earlier this year, and to many people's disappointment. And it's kind of a mishmash of a whole bunch of different genres. Cyberpunk is the primary with the relationships between the mega corporations and then the contractors that go out and make mischief on their behalf. But if you like mecha combat, it's in there. If you like X-wing dogfights, it's in there. If you like smugglers and bounty hunters and criminals and shenanigans, it's in there. It may not be in this book yet, but I'm certainly planning to go in that direction. And I remember talking to my brother actually after the second season of Mandalorian, and he's talking about how much fun the criminal side of Star Wars is. The bounty hunters and the crime lords and the Hutts and Han Solo the smuggler and all that stuff. The hive of scum and villainy in Mos Eisley, and that was really where I wanted to kind of delve into in the sci-fi setting. It's not going to be utopian and shiny and clean and wonderful. It's still going to be cutthroat, and there's still going to be shenanigans on all sides. And so that's very much kind of where I want to play with the series is the cyberpunk troublemaker side of things.
Okay, and so what tropes do you feel like you included in the Myrmidon's book?
Well, I mean, the whole Greek Spartan thing in particular. You can tell just from the mohawk on Bellerophon's helmet there on the cover. It's not often you're going to see somebody walking around with the horsehair helmet and an energy shield with a blaster. Selena, at the end of it, she's a cat girl assassin. But I play that straight in the sense that she's been genetically edited to be superior physically, stronger, faster, tougher, more agile, that kind of a thing. With mega corporations, you've always got like the evil, faceless scumbags who are pulling the strings for the little people below. The book itself is set on the planet of Montoya in La República del Escobar, and so I had to brush up on my Google Translate Spanish for a lot of it, because the setting assumes that shortly after, by mid 21st century, we will have started colonizing planets. And there's two ways that planets are going to get colonized. Either it's going to be an effort by a country, or it's going to be an effort by a business. And so the different planets that are going to exist and the different systems that are going to exist in this setting are very heavily descended from an Earth that you will recognize. The United States, the United Systems of Texas is like one of the largest interstellar polities there is, because in Texas everything's bigger, that kind of a thing.
Of course, naturally, and they're going to get bigger egos because of you now.
Yeah. So there's all kinds of sci-fi inspirations that I drew into it for little bits and pieces there. I'm a big gamer, and so playing games like Elite Dangerous, where you're racing around star systems in your ship. I love the mecha art from the Rifts tabletop game. The mechs and the robots and the power armor and all that kind of thing that gets rolled into there. It's a huge mash of everything that I love about science fiction. So I think it would probably be like a list of shorter. The list of tropes that I used would be shorter if I said what I didn't draw on.
Okay, and now onto the story itself. So what can you tell us about the main characters that you haven't already? What makes them distinct in the world of sci-fi?
Well, Selena is fresh out of the tank. The opening scene is her gaining consciousness for the first time and being really confused as to why she knows all these things when she has no prior existence to draw on. And it's because with her being this clone in the tank, she's received this post-hypnotic training programs and that sort of thing. So I've heard talking to other people about this story. She's above average intelligence, but she's got like a wisdom of 3 because she's so naive to start. She has no real worldly experience, and in fact, like, it boggles her mind that it would take somebody 18 or 19 or 20 years to get to the point where they're old enough and mature enough that they could join the military and start fighting, because she was rolling in the dojo at Paragon Savage week 2. that kind of thing. So this entire concept of time for her is skewed by the fact that she's had no childhood. She woke up and hit the gym and went from there. So that's a bit about Selena and where she's coming from. With the Myrmidons themselves, they're veterans, they're experienced, they're very much the opposite of everything Selena is. The Myrmidon program in Hellenic space, if you're suffering from one of these diseases where you will die, then you can volunteer for the program and they will perform the cyborg body swap, and then you serve. It's almost like the GI Bill, but in reverse, where you get the education after you're, well, in Myrmidon's case, you get the body up front and then you serve for the next 20 years. And then you're free to hit the open market as a private contractor. So the Myrmidons are all experienced and they're tough. With them being cyborgs, if they get a limb blown off, then they have little packs that can 3D fabricate a new joint to get the limb back in place. It may not be as strong as their normal one, but at least they can. Like, do you remember that cartoon or that ad from when we were kids where it's like, I can put my arm back on, you can't, so play safe? Right? There's a lot of that with the Myrmidons because their parts are replaceable. And so that does kind of make them inhuman in a sense, in that their concerns are not those of people who still have their meat bodies. But at the same time, they try to be honorable. They try to take contracts that, are, if not honest, it's fair game as far as mega corporation shenanigans are concerned. And the problem for them is going to be, the after effects of being blamed for this horrific crime. How are they going to react? How are they going to respond? What if they're no longer legitimate contractors and they're kind of, well, I mean, I'll tell you right now, the second book, the title is Disavowed. That ought to tell you where their arc is going. And so, you've got to kind of hit rock bottom before you can go again. So that's about them.
What about any secondary characters? Were there any ones that were especially memorable for you?
Well, I'll tell you, one of the other guys that I was talking to about the story, he gave me crap for killing off his favorite character. And I was like, who was that? And it's Director Ramirez. Spoilers, everyone dies. So Ramirez is Selena's primary handler. And the way that this gentleman phrased it was, he seems to be the only guy at the corporation who had a soul. And I hadn't thought about it, but yeah, that was, I portrayed him as sympathetic. He's doing his best to look out for the genies, knowing the coercive nature of the relationship between the genies and Paragon Savage. And he's trying to do the right thing. Even though, mega corporations are like profit, profit, profit. That's their priority. So, he was neat to write because because the genies are considered property and they're not legally people. When things go off the rails, he's the one who has to go back to the client who's basically renting this cat girl Sicario and correcting the behavior of the client. And the client is not used to being corrected. We'll just put it that way. But Ramirez was really cool to write, and I liked him a lot. So there's relatively few other consistent characters. A lot of the novel is Selena as the lone agent kind of thing, and then her supports. So as far as secondary characters, I'd say Ramirez was a good one.
So where did you get the name Genies from? Is that like any like Jinn from the
genetically engineered?
Oh, okay. I've heard that used for gypsies as well, so I wasn't sure.
Yeah, no, it's just genetically engineered.
Okay. So does your story have any bad guys without giving away spoilers that they have to confront?
Not in this book.
So it's one of man versus the universe kind of enemy.
Well, it's Selena's desire to. Well, I guess the CEO for Paragon Savage would be one of the bad guys. He only in that he's acting the way that you would expect the CEO of a mega corporation to act, and Selena's the one who's suffering and paying the price. So when she handles him, it's a turning point for the book. And she very near. I mentioned, I think, the methionine protocol earlier. When she finally does that impulsive, reckless thing to take control of her own destiny for once, it almost kills her because of the methionine protocol. And so it's the struggle for her where they still have this leash that controls her and controls the genies. As far as the whodunit, it's going to have to wait because we're not going to answer that question in this book.
Okay, that sounds fair. So speaking of characters, we ask everyone this, although you might give a different answer than most. But as authors, we do a lot of horrible things to our characters.
Yeah.
So if yours ever met you in a back alley and they said, you know what, I know that Jamie Ibson and he did horrible things to me, how's that going to play out?
Not very well. Not very well at all. Yeah, there's like between the Myrmidons and the genies, they're almost leaning right into superhero level combat abilities, and in part that is because of games like Rifts, where you can have characters that are going up and fighting against guys driving war bots that are like 30 feet tall and have rail guns and missile launches and all that kind of thing. And the Myrmidons in particular are cyborgs; they're war cyborgs, and so. There's a reason their services are in such high demand, and that's because they are incredibly lethal. So yeah, if I ran into my characters in a back alley, it's not going to go well.
I thought your sparring experience as a Mountie might give you a leg up, but
no, not even close.
All right, so Myrmidons Inc. Herbicide is clearly part of the series. I know because it says so on Amazon, and you told us, but there's currently only one book out in this series, and you mentioned more is coming. So where do you see this series going? What's next?
So tomorrow, I'm going to start work on book 2, which will be Myrmidons Inc. Disavowed. I'm going to be writing. I'm hoping to have that the draft finished by end of October. Then I'm going to be taking a bit of time off to write the sequel to Pacific Shogun, and then it's going to be back to Myrmidons book 3, which will be Ruthless, and then the 4th book is going to be Vindicated. I'm planning that 4-book arc to begin with, and we'll see if other people want to jump on board as we go, and we can start telling other stories in the setting. But that's kind of where I would like it to go, is into a shared universe that's a little bit Thieves World-ish, where you can have you can just pick up a series in the setting written by me, written by somebody else, and enjoy it without needing to have read other stuff in the series to have it really fit or make sense. One of the amazing things with Four Horsemen is that we are now 72 books deep. Roughly half build on each other, and then there's a whole bunch of spin-offs and side stories in the anthologies and that kind of a thing. But it can be daunting for somebody to pick up Cartwright's Cavaliers and find out that there's 50 books before you catch up to the books that are coming out now. If you're a voracious reader, that's totally cool. But that's the strength of Chris and Mark Wandry and Kevin Eikenberry and these guys who are able to plot 12 books at a time. And I'm not there. Maybe by book 4 I can start looking a couple books further. But I'm more used to that 3 to 4 book series length, and so that's kind of where I've been approaching this. That's not to say that I'm going to write 4 Myrmidon books and I'll be done with it. Just that's as far as I'm plotting out at this point.
Okay, so we know that all the literary universes, at least the good ones, have their own internally consistent rules of science, technology, and or magic. So, what sort of tech or magic could we expect from these books?
So I won't say that it's hard science in terms of how gravitics work, but anti-gravity tech is fairly ubiquitous in that you've got grav trucks and grav cars that zip around town and they're able to get up off the ground and go zooming around. But it's the same technology that drives ships inside a star system. And basically, the faster the ship, which accelerates along a Fibonacci sequence acceleration profile, basically, the fastest ships run at 233 gravities. If you want to go faster, then what you have to do is increase what a gravity means to the people inside the ship. So if you've got people on board the ship who are able to handle 3, 4, 5 gravities, then suddenly you can take that acceleration profile and really get ripping. But that's the only way for the larger ships that move slower to be able to combat the X-wing fighter type ships that will go ripping around at incredible speeds. Is that they need to exert more G's on the crew in order to be able to keep up. And then I actually built a spreadsheet. It's nerdy, but I built a spreadsheet to be able to figure out, okay, well, if they're going to be on a constant acceleration profile at 233 Gs to get to this planet, and the planet is this many light seconds away, then how long does it actually take to get there if they're accelerating for half of it and decelerating for half of it? Because space is really, really big. And one of the things from Mandalorian, just to kind of go sideways on it, was the Frog Lady episode where he wasn't able to use his jump, and he starts complaining immediately about how long this trip is going to take. And you never really got a sense of just how long he actually was flying with Frog Lady on board. But with Myrmidons, with the spreadsheet that I've tallied, I can be like, well, Earth is 500 light seconds from the sun. So if they're traveling that distance, it's going to take this many hours at this acceleration profile. And then and then maybe it all happens in the background, but it can become strategic and tactical calculations when we start dogfighting and that kind of thing. And then jumping between systems works differently. And unusually, rather than coming in from out system and arriving at a distance from the sun and then having to coast in from there, I took a bit of a page from Elite Dangerous. Anybody who's played the game will know when you jump to a system, you pop out danger close to the sun. And if you're not Johnny on the spot with turning and burning for out system, then you can go for a sun dive and you're going to need a new spaceship. And so that's the idea, is that as these ships are racing at FTL speeds into a system, it's the sun's own gravitational field that pops them out of light speed. And now they've got to turn and get themselves oriented to where they need to go and burning outbound. So what it really means is, from a, again, military sci-fi point of view, ships arriving from other systems, they are going to arrive in a very predictable sphere, and so you're going to have defensive structures there, battle stations that are all going to be inside Mercury orbit in order to be able to hammer any kind of invading force. And so that's partly what sets up this idea with the mega corporations hiring the small contractors to go out and make mischief on their behalf, because there are no but it is catastrophically expensive for you to take the spaceship equivalent of a carrier battle group and send it off to a star system to pick a fight. It is much more viable to send a quick little speedboat that will zip in and then be able to make their way outbound from there. So Myrmidons doesn't put much of a focus on the space stuff yet, but I figured out how it's going to work when I do, and we're going to go from there.
So do you use any programs besides just an Excel spreadsheet to build the universe? I know there are some mapping software programs through like Campaign Cartographer that let you actually build interstellar maps. You can say it's X distance from star system 1 to system 2, and you can start building like 3D renderings of the system so you can sort of look at it in real time.
I have not done that. It sounds cool. The best I've done so far is I've fired up a game of Stellaris and I've print screened the, I've screen captured the map, and then I started drawing bubbles and lines and stuff. And I went, this is ridiculous. I don't need to do this at this point. So really, all I've done is I've kind of come up with the different polities that exist. There's, like I said, the United Systems of Texas, La República del Escobar, the Star Kingdom of Windsor, which is like the rebuilding the British Commonwealth, that kind of thing. Dixie is another one. There's a whole bunch, and just kind of like putting together a list of the systems that they own and control. So like in Herbicide, when you meet the Myrmidons, they're chasing a guy who's captured a bunch of people from Rideau, and he's basically like going to go sell them into slavery. And so there's a stern chase with the Myrmidons ship that they partnered with, which is called the Pandora's Hope. And they're jumping from system to system and trying to cut the angles and carve hours of travel off of their race across space and time until they finally wind up in the system named for Bonnie and Clyde, which might give you a hint of who and what the system's all about. And so like it's not heavy in that that series, but I was basically just working off a list of systems that would kind of be in a line to get to each other. I didn't know that Campaign Cartographer did that. I might look into that. That's a good idea.
So I used fractal mapping, which was idiot proof as far as usability, but it's only good for what you're doing. Like you wouldn't be able to put that in a book and have it look professional. Whereas Campaign Cartographer, once you're done with a map with that, you could put it in a fantasy novel and it would stand up with maps in any of the classics as far as what you can do with it. But the barrier to entry skill wise is just not there.
Yeah.
And someone who's better at tech than me, a lot of people use it for like gaming and stuff, and they say, no, it's great, it's easy. And what do you like, some sort of computer moron? And I'm like, yes. But yeah, it's gorgeous work that it can do. So
like Campaign Cartographer has been around for a long time. They must be many, many, many editions past the old hex-based thing that I was using in high school.
It's pretty. I mean, I know it's the industry standard now for professional cartographers.
Cool.
The people that do that for a hobby. But yeah, so there are programs out there. I just was curious how you were doing that.
No.
All right, so
spreadsheets.
That works for now. Of all of the tech that you invented for your universe, what would you want for your daily use?
Your body.
New knees and a new back. I would take cyborg replacements of those in a heartbeat.
Okay, so your wife has weighed in. I was thinking it'd be something cool, and then I could ask you how you would abuse that tech, because we like to ask that follow-up. But new knees, kind of hard to abuse those, other than just normal life.
Yeah. No, I'm not looking to go out and cause mischief, despite what my business card says. I miss not snap, crackle, and popping like Rice Krispies when I'm walking around. So
understood. I get that moment sometimes when I can predict the weather.
Oh yeah,
that's my knee. Yeah, I feel you. Who knew getting blown up was bad for your health? Huh.
Go figure.
They didn't put that in the recruiting poster.
No.
So how did you go about creating? Because you've established that they've got kinds of aliens. I would consider generated constructs like the cat lady would be almost along the par of like an alien creature. So you've got all these kinds of beings other than just base humans.
Yep.
So how do you go about creating them? Do you let your nightmares inspire you? Do you let nature sort of mold you? How do you create these things?
Well, it's a mix. Role-playing games are so well developed for that kind of a thing that you can go through an infinite number of alien generators and stuff like that. But really, I was looking for stuff that would be readily identifiable, and it didn't have to be like there are no new stories. There's just new ways of telling them. And similarly, people joke about Star Trek, and distinguishing between different kinds of aliens based on the shape of their forehead. Obviously, that's because of the limitations of TV makeup and stuff like that. But generally speaking, like evolution is going to favor certain things over other things. So I wanted cyborgs. I wanted the genies. Well, with the genies, cats are quick and agile. Wolves are strong and brutal, and they work well in teams. And rhinos are tough. And so those are the three main animal hybrid flavors that Paragon Savage works with. On the Pandora's Hope crew, we've got another study in contrasts. The ogre-like Loadmaster is called a Jotun. And yeah, picture an ogre but with like silver tendrilled mohawk thing going on. That's the Loadmaster guy, compared to Thunderpaws. And Thunderpaws is, the aliens are called Mogwais because they resemble the Mogwais from the Gremlins movie, and that was the first thing that came to mind when humanity encountered them, and the name stuck. So Thunderpaws is about 2 feet tall, and he is brilliant. He is the astrogator science officer on board the Pandora's Hope. It doesn't quite have sarcasm figured out yet, but that's just because English is such a weird language to begin with. But those are some of the aliens that you're going to meet in Herbicide. My story in And Then It Got Weird features a different alien race that hasn't been introduced yet, and basically think dryads. Humanoid-ish, over large eyes, and then they've got like antlers instead of hair. But the Vashans, the Alari and the Vashans are one people who separated during an apocalypse a couple thousand years ago. And the Vashans are the ones who ended up stuck on the apocalyptic cataclysm-strewn planet, while the Alari are the ones who were able to get off planet and out into the stars. And that relationship is a major focus of the story in And Then It Got Weird. So I'm building it up kind of slowly, introducing different alien races. You mentioned Galaxy's Edge earlier, and one of the things that I really dig with Galaxy's Edge is how they take their time introducing the different aliens. You've got the G, you've got the Koobs, you've got the Skriz, the Wabanki. And you go to any GE fan, they know exactly what a Koob is. They know exactly who the G are. They know exactly what Skriz is. And that's because you didn't just like drinking from the fire hose hammer them with 1,000 different alien races all at once. And so I want to take my time and really develop these alien races so that they're three-dimensional, that they have cultural values, that they have ways of doing things and reasons for doing them the way that they do, and be distinguishable from each other. I don't want to just have Romulans and Vulcans, who are, pointy-eared humans, and some of them are logical and some of them are angry. So that's kind of where I'm coming at for that.
Okay. So clearly this interview is winding down. We've been going for about an hour and a half. But before we wrap up, was there anything about Myrmidon's Incorporated Herbicide that we didn't ask you before we move on?
I don't think so. I think we've covered a lot.
Okay. And just as a reminder, dear listener, if you go to his website, link will be in the show notes, and you sign up for his newsletter when you hear this on October 5th, he will include pictures of those little figurines. So this is especially important for all of our podcast audience, and we love you guys. We started as podcast only, and so you guys are awesome. But if you sign up for his newsletter, you can see those little figurines he kit bashed and then painted. Yeah. So, all right. As we bring this puppy to a close, can you tell listeners how they can find you?
My website is ibsonwrites.ca, and because Ibson confuses people, it's IBSON. It's like Mel Gibson, the actor, but without the G at the start. So it's all one word, ibsonwrites.ca. And on my website, I've got contact details. I've got free short stories that I've written that I'm now giving away as free downloads when you sign up for my newsletter. And it's a mix. There's fantasy, there's Four Horsemen, there's diesel punk, sky pirate, urban fantasy, all kinds of different stuff. So those are all giveaways off the website. I've designed a couple of challenge coins associated to Christopher Woods's Fallen World universe, and you can email me if you want to buy one of those. And that's basically my website. Otherwise, my primary social media presence is through Facebook. I've got my personal profile and then my Ibson Writes business profile. So
okay. And you can find us on our website at anchor.fm/blasters-and-blades. anchor.fm/blasters-and-blades. You can find us on Twitter at SF_fantasy_show, Sierra Foxtrot_fantasy_show. You can email us at blastersandbladespodcast@gmail.com. Again, that is blastersandbladespodcast@gmail.com. You can join all of our online Facebook shenanigans over there at facebook.com/groups/Blasters and Blades podcast. You can support the show at buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley. Again, buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley. Be sure to put in the comment section on the donation that it's for the podcast. I promise I will keep Doc Cisca and Nick Garber duly intoxicated. They will drink until their liver surrenders. And if you want to do your support on a reoccurring basis over on anchor.fm/blasters-and-blades, they have that option as well. All of it is appreciated. We greatly appreciate our current backers that help us fund what we're doing here. And then finally, I've made this comment before, but I'll do it again, is if there is anybody that you want us to interview, we are certainly open to suggestions. If there are any topics you want for fireside chats, we'll do that too. Just engage us on the email, on the podcast group, on Facebook, on all the ways you can reach out to us. And we're certainly open to suggestions and making this the kind of podcast you want to listen to. So we definitely don't want it to be stale. And so that is an option. If you've got a burning desire, if you've got a favorite author you want me to track down, I will stalk them. I will hide outside their window and hand deliver that letter. I mean, except for Elon Musk. Got that restraining order. Yeah, he's got that restraining order, but maybe he didn't really, really mean it, and maybe the judge was overreacting. I don't know. We'll see. Maybe I'll just ask him again. It'll be fine. So before it gets any weirder, and I can get weird, thank you for spending some of your precious time with us. For Nick Garber and Doc Cisca, I am J.R. Handley, and this was the Blasters and Blades podcast. We'll be back next week at the same time, where we'll indulge our love of nerd culture, cheesy jokes, and all things that go boom. And one more time, because Doc isn't here, as we close, I will remind you my one piece of wisdom: pineapple does not belong on pizzas.